among the surplus, who has courage and passion enough openly to resist society, to reply with declared war upon the bourgeoisie to the disguised war which the bourgeoisie wages upon him, goes forth to rob, plunder, murder, and burn. Of this surplus population there are, according to the reports of the Poll Law Commissioners, on an average, 1.5 million in England and Wales. In Scotland the number cannot be ascertained for want of poor law regulations, and with Ireland we shall deal separately. Moreover, this 1.5 million includes only those who actually apply to the parish for relief. The great multitude who struggle on without recourse to this most hated expedient, it does not embrace. On the other hand, a good part of the number belongs to the agricultural districts, and does not enter into the present discussion. During a crisis this number naturally increases markedly, and want reaches its highest pitch. Take, for instance, the crisis of 1842, which, being the latest, was the most violent, for the intensity of the crisis increases with each repetition, and the next, which may be expected not later than 1847, 87 will probably be still more violent and lasting. During this crisis the poor rates rose in every town to a hitherto unknown height. In Stockport, among other towns, for every pound paid in house rent, 8 shillings of poor rate had to be paid, so that the rate alone formed 40% of the house rent. Moreover, whole streets stood vacant, so that there were at least 20,000 fewer inhabitants than usual, and on the doors of the empty houses might be read Stockport to let. In Bolton, where, in ordinary years, the rents from which rates are paid average £86,000, they sank to £36,000. The number of the poor to be supported rose, on the other hand, to 14,000, or more than 20% of the whole number of inhabitants. In Leeds, the Poll Law Guardians had a reserve fund of £10,000. This, with a contribution of £7,000, was wholly exhausted before the crisis reached its height. So it was everywhere. A report drawn up in January, 1843, by a committee of the Anti-Corn Law League, on the condition of the industrial districts in 1842, which was based upon detailed statements of the manufacturers, asserts that the poor rate was, taking the average, twice as high as in 1839. And that the number of persons requiring relief has trebled, even quintupled, since that time, that a multitude of applicants belong to a class which had never before solicited relief, that the working class commands more than 2/3 less of the means of subsistence than from 1834 to 1836, that the consumption of meat had been decidedly less, in some places 20%, in others reaching 60% less, that even handicraftsmen, smiths, bricklayers, and others, who usually have full employment in the most depressed periods, now suffered greatly from want of work and reduction of wages, and that, even now, in January, 1843, wages are still steadily falling. And these are the reports of manufacturers. The starving workmen, whose mills were idle, whose employers could give them no work, stood in the streets in all directions, begged singly or in crowds, besieged the sidewalks and armies, and appealed to the passers-by for help. They begged, not cringing like ordinary beggars, but threatening by their numbers, their gestures, and their words. Such was the state of things in all the industrial districts, from Leicester to Leeds, and from Manchester to Birmingham. Here and there disturbances arose, as in the Staffordshire potteries, in July. The most frightful excitement prevailed among the workers until the general insurrection broke out throughout the manufacturing districts in August. When I came to Manchester in November, 1842, there were crowds of unemployed working men at every street corner, and many mills were still standing idle. In the following months these unwilling corner loafers gradually vanished, and the factories came into activity once more. To what extent want and suffering prevail among these unemployed during such a crisis, I need not describe. The poor rates are insufficient, vastly insufficient. The philanthropy of the rich is a raindrop in the ocean, lost in the moment of falling. Beggary can support but few among the crowds. If the small dealers did not sell to the working people on credit at such times, as long as possible paying themselves liberally afterwards, it must be confessed, and if the working people did not help each other, every crisis would remove a multitude of the surplus through death by starvation. Since, however, the most depressed period is brief, lasting, at worst, but 1, 2, or 2.5 years, most of them emerge from it with their lives after dire privations. but indirectly by disease, etc. Every crisis finds a multitude of victims, as we shall see. First, however, let us turn to another cause of abasement to which the English worker is exposed, a cause permanently active, in forcing the whole class downwards. Irish immigration. We have already referred several times, in passing, to the Irish who have immigrated into England, and we shall now have to investigate more closely the causes and results of this immigration. The rapid extension of English industry could not have taken place if England had not possessed in the numerous and impoverished population of Ireland a reserve at command. The Irish had nothing to lose at home, and much to gain in England, and from the time when it became known in Ireland that the east side of St George's Channel offered steady work and good pay for strong arms, every year has brought armies of the Irish hither. It has been calculated that more than 1 million have already immigrated, and not far from 50,000 still come every year, nearly all of whom enter the industrial districts, especially the great cities, and there form the lowest class of the population. Thus there are in London, 120,000, in Manchester, 40,000, in Liverpool, 34,000, Bristol, 24,000, Glasgow, 40,000, Edinburgh, 29,000, poor Irish people 98. These people, having grown up almost without civilization, accustomed from youth to every sort of privation, rough, intemperate, and improvident, bring all their brutal habits with them among a class of the English population which has, in truth, little inducement to cultivate education and morality. Let us hear Thomas Carlyle upon this subject. 90b. The wild Milesean features, looking false ingenuity, restlessness, unreason, misery, and mockery, salute you on all highways and byways. The English coachman, as he whirls past, lashes the Milesean with his whip, curses him with his tongue. The Milesean is holding out his hat to beg. He is the sorest evil this country has to strive with. In his rags and laughing savagery, he is there to undertake all work that can be done by mere strength of hand, and back for wages that will purchase him potatoes. He needs only salt for condiment. He lodges to his mind in any pig hutch or dog hutch, roosts in outhouses, and wears a suit of tatters, the getting on and off of which is said to be a difficult operation, transacted only in festivals and the high tides of the calendar. The Saxon man, if he cannot work on these terms, finds no work. The uncivilized Irishman, not by his strength, but by the opposite of strength, drives the Saxon native out, takes possession in his room. There abides he, in his squalor and unreason, in his falsity and drunken violence, as the ready-made nucleus of degradation and disorder. Whoever struggles, swimming with difficulty, may now find an example how the human being can exist not swimming, but sunk. That the condition of the lower multitude of English labourers approximates more and more to that of the Irish, competing with them in all the markets, that whatsoever labour, to which mere strength with little skill will suffice, is to be done, will be done not at the English price, but at an approximation to the Irish price, at a price superior as yet to the Irish, that is, superior to scarcity of potatoes for 30 weeks yearly. Superior, yet hourly, with the arrival of every new steamboat, sinking nearer to an equality with that. If we accept his exaggerated and one-sided condemnation of the Irish national character, Carlyle is perfectly right. These Irishmen who migrate for fourpence to England, on the deck of a steamship on which they are often packed like cattle, insinuate themselves everywhere. The worst dwellings are good enough for them, their clothing causes them little trouble, so long as it holds together by a single thread. Shoes they know not, their food consists of potatoes and potatoes only, whatever they earn beyond these needs they spend upon drink. What does such a race want with high wages? The worst quarters of all the large towns are inhabited by Irishmen. Whenever a district is distinguished for especial filth and especial ruinousness, the explorer may safely count upon meeting chiefly those Celtic faces which one recognizes at the first glance as different from the Saxon physiognomy of the native, and the singing, aspirate brogue which the true Irishman never loses. I have occasionally heard the Irish Celtic language spoken in the most thickly populated parts of Manchester. The majority of the families who live in cellars are almost everywhere of Irish origin. In short, the Irish have, as Dr. Kay says, discovered the minimum of the necessities of life, and are now making the English workers acquainted with it. Filth and drunkenness too, they have brought with them. The lack of cleanliness, which is not so injurious in the country, where population is scattered, and which is the Irishman's second nature, becomes terrifying and gravely dangerous through its concentration here in the great cities. The Milesian deposits all garbage and filth before his house door here, as he was accustomed to do at home, and so